Hey guys, before we get started with the episode, I just have two announcements to make. One, I have the Jibs Journal is out now. I send a weekly journal through email every single week that covers episode highlights, tips and tricks that the entrepreneurs in the show have gone over, and just other cool things that are happening. If you're interested in being subscribed to that journal, the link is in the description. The second announcement is I've released a course. So the course is how to crowdfund for your passion project, your side hustle. I crowdfunded over $65,000 in less than 90 days through my organization called Research Detroit. And the class is going to cover, the nitty-gritty details on how I did that, how I delegated the tasks with my team, the templates, the samples. It goes into full detail on how to run an effective crowdfunding campaign. So if you're interested in taking that course, the link is in the description as well.
It's just about getting up and doing it and finding the time, finding the people, and making it happen.
You take control and you say, okay, this needs to be done, and you do it.
And you're never ready to start a business. You either do it or you don't.
Welcome to the Jibs Podcast, showcasing Detroit's movers and shakers, bringing you stories that reveal the gusto and grit that's long defined the city and its people. Together, we'll uncover the history and direction of the Motor City, one voice at a time. This is the Jibs Podcast with Jibran Ahmed.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the newest episode of the Jibs Podcast. I'm here with Sarah from Team fEMR. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. It's a beautiful morning.
It is.
Drove through a beautiful neighborhood.
Yes.
So thank you again for being here. I really appreciate it.
Of course, yeah. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So let's get right into it. Can you explain what Team fEMR is?
Yes. So Team fEMR is a tech company, basically. We developed a free and open source electronic medical record system, and it's designed for areas without internet or electricity. So mobile clinics and refugee camps and disaster scenarios. I hesitate to say we're just a tech company because we're also really focused on the data that we collect and utilizing that to research and improve quality of care for mobile populations.
So where are you guys working right now?
The system's been deployed since 2014 to Haiti, the Dominican Republic, Nicaragua, Peru, the Peruvian Andes, and it'll be deployed in Jordan, in Syrian refugee camps next month. And it's been piloted with FEMA for domestic disasters as well out in California. Mm-hmm.
So where did the idea come from? How did it start?
Yeah, good question. So we were all students, the three of us. There's three co-founders, Dr. Eric Brown, Kevin Zurich, and myself. And we were students at Wayne State University. Back in 2010, the earthquake struck Haiti. And so Eric and I volunteered in the aftermath of the earthquake, and we worked in clinics. And in one of the clinics, a patient died from diabetes. And when we got back to the States, we learned that another team had been there a month prior. So had we shared information, we would have brought insulin and perhaps gotten her to a hospital. Mm-hmm. So we noticed the need and the lack of continuity and communication between volunteer clinicians, and a large part of that was not being able to keep electronic records. So we implemented the project into computer science classes at Wayne State University. We met Kevin there, and he joined, and the three of us incorporated and have volunteered ever since.
So how are you getting into these different countries? Who are you talking to?
Great question. Until recently, we haven't done any interviews or any advertisements. It's literally just been word of mouth. A lot of people, a lot of medical schools have, student organizations that want to go help in these remote areas. And word of mouth happened. So University of Tennessee has used us, Louisiana State University, Virginia Commonwealth University, all of these schools of medicine, Google EMR for short-term medical missions, and we're one of the only things that comes up. So I guess that's how. We've presented on the importance of data and various aspects of our data collection at academic conferences, and I think that's another way how people have heard of us.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm really curious when you are talking with these different people from different countries, has there been a barrier of language or maybe barrier of culture, or just different kind of understandings that have, either been funny or just frustrating?
Yeah, good question. Two stories. Well, the first is that, so our system is designed for American clinicians who are volunteering for a week at a time in a remote setting. So, or in a, refugee camp or something. So it's designed for like English-speaking Americans working abroad, and then they come back. So we don't really interact with people from these different countries or these different disaster zones. But I will tell you, I, for the first time, had to go to a pharmacy in America. So I volunteered in Haiti in the aftermath of the earthquake in 2010, 11, 12, and I think the beginning of 2013. So I've never, on those like groups, if you needed drugs because you were sick, you're in like the middle of nowhere, so the doctor on the team would give you medicine, I'd never actually been to a pharmacy until like a couple months ago. And I had to go, and I was like, I have no idea how this works. I've never done it in America, but that's the only funny story, I think.
So you said you started in 2014, right?
Yeah, 2011 we started development. Okay. We incorporated officially as like a group in 2014. Okay, when it deployed for the first time. But we developed it, the years leading up to that.
Right. Yeah. So are there any, so that was like kind of like the development phase, I'm assuming. So like from the development phase up to like implementation and even up until now, have you faced any like criticisms or obstacles or people being like, this doesn't work out? Or...
Great question, and I'm so glad you asked. So there's a lot of controversy around short-term medical missions within the medical community and the academic community. And that's because, if you go somewhere for a week, how much can you really help someone who has diabetes or hypertension? So what is the point of going for a week and then leaving? And how do you know those medicines are being used properly? And standards of care in America are not the same standards of care necessarily in other regions of the world. So when I say we developed an EMR for short-term medical missions, that's what it was originally designed for. People automatically assume that we support short-term medical missions and that we are for them and that we think they're great. That's not necessarily true. For instance, we started because there was a preventable death, because these people, the folks that we were treating relied on us having the right medicine, and we didn't have the right medicine, so it was preventable. So we started this to analyze quality of care in these settings, which has not been possible before because there's not been record collection or data analysis of these types of groups before. And there's about $250 million and probably a lot more that are spent on these types of medical groups or medical trips every year. So they should be studied, and the only way to study it is to collect data. And then only recently has there been like other uses for fEMR, so the refugee camps, domestic disasters, et cetera. But we were originally designed to improve and actually study short-term medical missions. So I face a lot of criticism, I'd say, with that. And I have to convince people that we're doing it for the right reasons.
So I guess when you face that criticism or those objections, like for you and for your co-founders, like what kind of like self-talk do you have in your own head to get past those barriers? Or I'm sure like you get down on yourself sometimes, or I'll get down on myself sometimes, but how do you overcome those things personally?
Yeah, great question. Because sometimes this feels like I'm fixing roads in Asia and I don't live there. Why would I be fixing those roads? So it can get a little tough. But number one, I would say our work is definitely based in evidence. So if you look at, there's this academic publication I love to cite all the time, and it's doing a literature review of transient medical clinics, of these quote unquote short-term medical service trips. There's very little empirical data on them. So I usually just cite the academic material that says that, and it's usually the best argument. So with regard to that sort of criticism. But in general, a lot of criticism we face is we're in Detroit and people like to sponsor things that are helping Detroit. Well, we don't necessarily have an effect in Detroit. We have an effect in all other parts of the world. So people don't like that as much, why aren't you helping your own people? But, in these refugee clinics and in remote areas, people, in America, you can just, even if you can scrounge up $5 or $1, you can go get a power bar at CVS. You can't in these settings, So that's the self-talk, I guess.
Yeah, totally. So where are you hoping to take fEMR in the next year, 5 years, 10 years?
Great question. So in the next year, we need a home. We've all been volunteers for so long. We don't have offices. So we're really focusing on garnering support here in Detroit and sort of launching as a full-out nonprofit, fully staffed here in Detroit. So I'm really pushing that right now. In fact, our first in-person event will be in a month here in Detroit, so it's sort of like a day-long conference. In 5 years, and let's say 7 years, our goal is to be financially sustainable. So one idea, we have a couple ideas, and one of them is to have a for-profit subsidiary that, feeds money into the parent company, which is a nonprofit.
So, a big part of this podcast is being able to offer tangible advice for people listening that want to start an organization or a business or anything. So, being a nonprofit, what has been your experience, writing for grants or trying to raise money, just operating as a nonprofit in general? What kind of advice would you give to people?
Ooh, so much. So operating as a nonprofit specifically, I've found over the years that a lot of folks are very well-intentioned and they make a nonprofit and their heart's in a good place and they're well-meaning, but it fizzles out. And because a lot of folks who do that don't necessarily have MBAs and have studied business or entrepreneurship or whatever. So I try real hard to run our business like a for-profit business. The only difference is we do not measure our success by a profit at all, of course. In fact, our goal is not to make a profit. But I would suggest, even if your heart's in the right place, you have to have a sustainable way to help people and really understand the problem that you're trying to fix, before starting to attack it. So you can't, have your heart in a good place and just say, I want to start a nonprofit, and then just find the first, start the first thing that comes to mind. You really have to do due diligence and really run it like it's a business.
I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's go from talking about fEMR to kind of your journey and how, you work, how you became an entrepreneur. Yeah. So, what's your background and how did it get you to where you are today?
Yeah, interesting question. So I started this, I started my career as a classically trained ballet dancer. So I left home at a young age and I joined a ballet company in New York, and just a few seasons in, I had to stop dancing because of an injury. So that's why I was a pre-medical student at Wayne State. And I will say that in itself is probably the best argument for supporting the arts ever. I really feel like, I was on this trip in Haiti and this person died, and I came up with this way, this innovative way, and to help fix a problem. And if you're in the arts, you have to be very resourceful and independent, and you have to think critically a lot about a lot of different things. And ballet specifically is a very, it's an art form. It's an aesthetically pleasing art form, but it's a very intellectual art form. Looking back, I really think those experiences set me up for this. And I've since made a comeback to my field. So I still perform, and in a month we'll be back in Chicago filming stuff. But it's being an artist is almost like being an entrepreneur. So I would say anything I learned from the arts, I could apply to this, and it helped a lot. And also I had the right partners. I have the right partners. So Eric Dr. Brown is a neurosurgeon, so understands academia and the clinical side of things. And Kevin is a software developer. So it was not only my background as sort of an entrepreneur in the arts anyway, but having the right partners as well.
Right. What practices can translate from ballet to running a business, and then even vice versa, that you think about consciously when you are doing either one of those things?
Yeah. So since I do both, I have to be really efficient. Each day I have to plan very, very well. So I think just doing both at the same time has made me improve in both fields, because I've had to I have no time to waste. And I think a lot of dancers have things that they do on the side. This happens to be a little bit more technical than most, but a lot of dancers have foundations or, model or have a second thing that they do during the off season. Right. Other than increasing efficiency, I don't know. And then I guess always being very humble. I think you have to learn a lot constantly. Like if you're the leader, you have to be looking, 10 steps ahead of everyone else. And I think in order to do that, you have to humble yourself a little bit and not get too satisfied with where you are, right. And so and I think being a good leader, you always have to be learning. And in ballet, you're just perpetually a student. Any form of dance, really, you're perpetually a student. So I think that's lent itself.
So how do you, you're doing two very technical things.
Yes.
How are you managing your time? And, if you ever get to the point where you're like burning out or really exhausted, like how do you fix that?
Yeah, good question. I'm just coming from a month off because I was pretty burnt out and I needed a break. And I found that taking a step back has actually given me so much more energy. I don't know. And I will say, I feel like I know I've been doing this for 7 years now, but it's still new. Every year it has grown so much that I feel like I'm adjusting constantly to a new schedule and to different things. So I don't know, other than efficiency. And I think I learned too that like in the world of entrepreneurship and especially nonprofit entrepreneurship, like social entrepreneurship, it doesn't happen overnight. Mm-hmm. And I used to get very stressed if we weren't, hitting certain goals. And I realized that like, I can't let perfection get in the way of good, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Can you talk about, do you think that there is a specific event in your childhood or from being a young professional that has really impacted the way that you work today? Or has kind of defined what you're doing today?
I've never thought about that. That's a good question. I come from a family of entrepreneurs, I will say. My dad had a very successful law firm here in Michigan. My mom had her own court reporting firm. My brother has his own firm. And they all have the biggest hearts. So, I think kind of a famous story is my dad, had clients who couldn't necessarily pay him. So they would, one time I think he got paid in firewood. I might be screwing up this story, but so I think it's just sort of how I was raised, with an entrepreneurial spirit and always with an eye towards equitable living for everyone.
So for anybody listening or watching, if they want to chase a dream, they want to go towards entrepreneurship, or they want to start their own business or anything, they just feel stuck. Like, what kind of advice would you give them?
Choose a different field. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm just kidding. Don't edit that out. No, I'm just kidding. I am a firm believer in that there will be joy. And if you hit a dead end and you get stuck in that dead end, and you sort of inherit that mentality of I'm stuck, you obviously then you won't go anywhere. I would say work on the assumption that everything will work out. Mm-hmm. If you do your due diligence and you keep working, I will say it might not work out the way you thought it would, but it will work out. And so if you keep that sort of optimism, I think it sort of feeds itself and it'll keep itself going. I thought my world was over when I had to leave New York when I was 19. And everything I'd worked for was gone. But here I am, it didn't work out the way that I thought that it would, but it definitely has worked out. Yeah. And, and in a way better than I could have imagined. And I think that's important. When you think of entrepreneurs, sometimes it's easy to think about young people, but I think that anyone, I was at Wayne State as an undergrad in, when was that, like 2009, 2010. When a lot of my classmates were folks who were reinventing themselves because they got laid off because of the financial crisis. Mm. And so a lot of those folks were launching new arenas in life. And so, again, it might not work out the way that you thought it would, but work on the assumption that it will work out, and just keep working.
I think that's really good advice.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of so there's like a rule, 10x versus times 10 thinking. You ever heard of it?
No.
Okay, so like for example,
Okay.
let's say that you want to start like a coffee shop.
Okay.
And so you can be like, oh, I really want to grow this coffee business to be like a huge corporation, right?
Yeah.
So you can think of it in a times 10 model, which would be like, like Caribou Coffee. Like the guy who runs Caribou Coffee can do, whatever he wants. He's a pretty rich guy. Caribou Coffee is a nationally known coffee chain. But if you want to think about your corporation in a like to the power of 10 thinking, then you have to think about Starbucks. Like how does Starbucks run? The guy that runs Starbucks is an internationally known brand, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you make every decision on that to the exponent of 10, thinking that if this decision is gonna get me to that point, then you're gonna get a lot more farther than you think that you're gonna get.
Yes. I agree.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah.
I didn't explain that well, but anyway.
No, I get it. Like exponential. No, I get it.
Yeah. Well, cool. Is there anything else that you feel like you want to tell the listeners or tell anybody that's watching?
Detroit is an exciting place.
Yeah.
And I used to come to Detroit to rest, and like visit with family, and I blink and all of a sudden I'm starting this, business here, and there's all these things happening. So it is alive and well. And I think if you're going to be an entrepreneur, I was saying this morning to folks on the phone that tech companies, I think, want to go to the coasts, San Francisco or New York. But honestly, I think Detroit's a much better option. There's a lot of, I know Detroit's sort of known for blue collar workers and, what have you, but there's a whole lot more going on now. These days, there's all these artists here, moving here. There's, the university is producing a lot of great talent that I'm looking to hire, so, start with what you have and where you are. And I think that there's a lot of potential here.
Yeah, there's a good quote that goes, Detroit's big enough to matter to the rest of the world, but small enough for you to matter in it.
Yes, yeah, I agree. And it's really exciting. There's a lot more like opportunities for nonprofits, and there used to be the Wilson Center. I don't know if you know about that. Is opening up, and all these this building that we're in right now. All these opportunities for nonprofits. So it's a really exciting time, and I can't wait to connect with anyone who's listening right now.
I think you touched on a great point, and I think that's why this podcast kind of exists, to highlight all these people that are doing things and that don't really get the opportunity to showcase themselves. That Quicken Loans does, or these other companies that are downtown.
Well, good for you for hosting it then.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. So for people listening or watching, if they want to get a hold of you, how can they do so?
So that's teamfemr.org. So TEAMFEMR.org. You can donate straight on that website, or email us, any of us, or join. If you're a developer, you can join our sort of development community in Slack. If you're a clinician, you can test out the EMR online.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you being on the show. And for everybody watching or listening, until next time, stay tuned. Cool.